going to be reading Matthew 13, 1 through 10. The same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil, and they brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen." Then the disciples came to him and asked, "Why do you speak to them in the parables?"
Thanks be to God. Thank you so much, Camden. Aren't we proud of him and how he has grown up in the church? Camden, thanks for the way you share your love for Christ through your music. It just gets better and better and better. Will you pray with me? Oh Lord, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Today begins a journey towards a hill outside of Jerusalem. And as you've read in the writing there, this has always been one of my favorite seasons because it is so introspective and self-reflective. I love especially when we get into traditional worship also in this worship, but particularly in the hymns of Lent. I love the minor keys in which the songs are written. I love the vigor and the difficulty of the words that challenge us to a life of true discipline. I love the simpler altar arrangements and the simpler colors that remind us of the beauty and the value of simplicity. As I thought about the number of different ways that I might approach this, however many Lents I've been preaching in my ministry, I came up with a whole series that I got really excited about. And then halfway through the planning, I changed my mind and started all over again. And I think because of just the influence of the monastic community on my life, I really feel like this is a great opportunity to be able to study some of the disciplines of the monastic early church to try to understand how we can apply some of those principles in our daily living, which is much too complicated and crowded and noisy. What would it mean to install some of those disciplines in our life now that can maybe last far beyond Lent? So you'll see the things that I'm talking about. Listening to and praying the scriptures today are Lectio Divina, humility, the beauty of work, including manual labor, the value of rest, the value of hospitality, the value of stability. In the midst of difficult times, stability. Today, specifically, we're going to talk about Lectio Divina, the study of Scripture. And so let me start by saying this. There's more than one way to read the Bible. There is more than one way to read the Bible. And this church is full of people who read it in lots of different ways. So that's the challenge for the preacher. Every Sunday, you know that any given moment you've got people who are reading this book in a different way. But that's some of the beauty of our church. Let me say a word about John Wesley and what he believed about Scripture. Many of you are going to know this. Hopefully there'll be some insight in it. As United Methodists, I think it's really, really good to look back to the life of the founder of our faith and what made him so strong in his belief of Scripture. It's important to know that John Wesley was both a scholar and an evangelist. He believed in the study of Scripture. He applied the best scholarly resources that he could to the study of Scripture. He did that throughout his ministry and taught that to his pastors. But he also believed that Scripture needed to be read in such a way that it could shape and form us. That we can just approach it, that we can listen to it, that we can sit with it, and not be so much about analysis of it like we Westerners are particularly good at doing. Wesley believed that Scripture was one of the means of grace, an extra opportunity for us to draw closer to God. And he talked about 5 means of grace that he felt would put us in a place where we could be even closer in relationship to God. Study of Scripture was one of them. What would you suppose another one would be?
Prayer.
Prayer.
Use it.
Holy Communion. Here's another one. We all do this one. Fasting. There's one we practice regularly. He practiced, it was either 2 or 3 times a week, wherever Bob Pearson is, he could tell us. 2 or 3 times. 2 or 3 times.
We're doing 7 times a week.
2 or 3 times a week. Also, Christian conferencing. Talking among ourselves as Christians, engaging in dialogue. For him, that was a means of grace, of drawing closer to God. When he wrote his commentaries of Old and New Testament, which I've studied and they're fascinating, he drew upon, as I said, the best scholarship of the day. And you know there were 4 primary beliefs for Christian faith and practice, and you know those as the Wesleyan quadrilateral. What are they? Scripture, tradition, experience, and reason. But for him, Scripture was primary. It was the primary rule for practice. So I want to ask you this. As we talk about Lectio Divina and studying Scripture more in depth, I would ask you, do you think it matters whether you have an inerrant reading of Scripture to believe that every word is the word that came straight from God? Or is it possible for you to reflect on and study on Scripture in such a way that you still see some of its inconsistencies and troublesome passages, but you can allow it to shape and form you? For some people, it's either all true or none of it's true. And they cannot worship and they cannot come to Bible study without that approach. For others of us, it's that we recognize and see some of the inconsistencies. We may have studied and seen how it came together. Folks, let me tell you, when I entered seminary, I went into a faith crisis because I was raised in a very conservative reading of Scripture home. And then I go to the world of academia and it was take everything out of me and then I get deconstruct and I get to reconstruct it. But for me, it was an exercise in learning how to love the Word and the different forms that it is. It's narrative, it's poetry, it's prose, it's law, it's prophets, it's all of those things. And whether they have full truth or not, they bring application and love and light to our life. I hope on that we can agree. It still has authority for me in my life. I couldn't stand up and preach before you today unless it did. I had to work out that faith crisis, though, because I didn't know if I would ever be able to stand and preach until I worked that out. Now, in the early days of Christianity, in the early days of the Catholic Church and the Christian Church, the world around them was full of folks that had conflicting views to what folks believed about God and about the life of God in those who worship him. So Saint Benedict, in the 5th century, an Italian monk, who we know as the father of Western monasticism, put together a rule and an order for how people could live different than those around them. For many of the poor, it was a step above to come and live in the monastery, in the monastic community, to be able to practice the disciplines of the Christian faith. So St. Benedict wrote a little book called The Rule of St. Benedict. Tiny little thing. But you want to talk about chock full of disciplines for the Christian life. Things like this. How and when and which psalms you're to read and worship. How the monks should sleep. How they should serve in the kitchen. What meals are to be served and how much you could eat or drink. No excess. The clothes and the shoes that the brothers were supposed to wear. What to do with people who come to worship or meals late. How to observe Lent, how to pray, how to sing the Scriptures. There were also guidelines on the goodness of manual labor, the value of rest and study, the value of everyone in the community, and the value of silence. One of the monasteries that I used to visit on a regular basis was a Trappist monastery, the order of Cistercians of the strict observance, and they practiced a vow of silence until the 1950s. These guys did not talk to each other. Can you imagine that? Yes, I couldn't do it either. I couldn't do it either. The rules were relaxed a little bit later, and they were able to speak, but after Compline in the evening, no speaking. Can you imagine the value of silence? We could probably all practice that a bit more. Granted, most of us are not going to live in a cloister with monks, but there is wisdom that we can distill from the way they live that can apply to us in our much too busy world. This discipline of Benedict is a discipline of greater attentiveness, greater mindfulness, greater awareness. As we think about the other two texts, besides the one that was read to you by Camden, and I'll get there, I want you to think about this passage from Deuteronomy 30:14. This simple passage. The word is very near to you. It's in your mouth. It's in your heart. And then the great Shema that comes from Deuteronomy. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Keep these words that I'm commanding you today. Recite them to your children when you're at home and when you're away from home. Bind them as a sign on your hand. Put them on your forehead. Fix them and write them on the doorpost of your house. Remember the plaque I showed the kids? As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. How public are you about your faith? You know, I know, again, there's a difference in the South and the West. Sometimes you can be too public about it. Sometimes you cannot be public enough about it. But in the early Jewish formation, memory was so important. In the midst of all the different folks who had so many different beliefs, remembering who they are, remembering who they were was vital. That's why they were told to recite it and bind it and fix it and know it and live it. From Psalm 119, you'll know this one about the beauty of Scripture and the psalmist, oh, how I love your law. It is my meditation all day long. Your commandments make me wiser than my enemies, for it is always with me. How sweet are your words to my mouth, sweeter than honey to my taste. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a what? And a light for my path. What good word would you want to fix as an emblem on your forehead? You know, people affix good words these days. How many of you have tattoos? I was looking at Jade last night. She's got a couple. She'll probably tell us about them. Some of them very Christian, and she'll explain those, I'm sure. What would it be to tattoo on your body, God is love? Or do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God? Or here I am, send me. Whatever it takes to remember it. I don't know that I would do the tattoo, but some folks do as an emblem, as a marker. This is who I am and this is who I love. What is sweeter than honey to your lips? And what path is most dim for you these days that needs to be lit by the love and the light of the psalmist from 119? If you were going to meditate on a favorite passage of Scripture, what would it be? Do you have a favorite passage? Come on, lovers of the Word. Which is the heavens, declare the glory of God. There's one that declares it. Somebody else. Yes. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are ever with me. I will fear no evil, you are ever with me. Somebody else. A mantra for me, thy word have I hid in my heart that I might not sin against thee. Somebody else. God is love. What time I'm afraid I will put my trust in thee. When I was going through my second miscarriage, that was my mantra. What time I'm afraid I will put my trust in thee. Oh. would love to meditate on Genesis 1 and 2, the creation of the earth. Two different creation stories, by the way. Did you know that? Genesis 1 and 2. Completely different creation stories. Now, if we took what Camden gave us and practiced Lectio Divina in it, Matthew 13, we'll get to that. I want to say two other things to you quickly. Other ways to read the scripture: informationally and functionally. A lot of folks read it that way. Information, to gain information, you need to learn something new. You're searching the scriptures just to learn more about how things were done in biblical times, for example. Or you read it functionally because you have a purpose. For example, a medical student preparing for the MCATs, cramming, studying, function, there's purpose to study. And sometimes we study so that we might be able to have a means to an end. But the way Wesley would suggest it is that we also read it devotionally, letting it shape us and form us, formational and relational, putting us into a place of potentially deeper relationship with God. So if we took the parable that Camden read to us, and we practice Lectio Divina with it, if you look in your bulletin, you have, I think it's question number 2 or 3, it gives you the outline of the reading, meditation, prayer, and contemplation. So imagine yourself reading that scripture, and then think about when you read and study scripture, where are you? Are you outdoors? Are you indoors? You have a favorite chair? What translation do you like to use? Now, for some of you, I may be really asking piercing questions because maybe you don't have a regular practice of reading scripture. I kind of have a gig every Sunday. I have to do it. But I do it both for information and also to be able to share something with you as a means to an end, functionality, but also devotionally. But if you don't have a regular time, I want to challenge you. Think about just getting into the Word and maybe looking at a passage of Scripture that you're really not sure about, and practice reading it and then meditating on it. What value might this add to my life? Chew on it like a cow chews on its cud and extract from it what's there for me. What meaning did it have for them then, and what could it mean for me now? For example, when Peter asked Jesus, how many times should I forgive my brother? 7 times? And what did Jesus say? 70 times 7. Meditate on that. Your toughest enemy forgives 70 times 7. Or, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I shall not want. Meditate on that. In this story of the farmer sowing the seed, have you ever seen such an irresponsible, high-risk farmer just scattering it wherever he would scatter? The soil hasn't even been tilled. I mean, he scatters it on hardened ground, and then he scatters it on some ground that has rocks, and maybe people get joyful and it takes roots. And then, the birds come and eat it up. And then he sows some on thorny soil. And some of us get so intellectual about reading scripture that the thorns just choke it out. And we won't accept any meaning in it because we're smarter than this text. We're analyzing and engaging it. We won't let it shape or form us because we got this. And then for some of us, it takes root. Which soil are you? And then now, after you've read it and meditated it, then pray on it. What does this mean for me? What would it ask me to do? How good am I at sowing seed? How much seed does this guy have anyway? When's the last time my soil has been soaked? What does it take to assure that the seed takes root? What does it take to tame my thorny intellect so I would be more willing to let this text shape and form me? And here's another one. Is the size of the harvest the main point? Is it all about how many people fill the pews? Or is it how deep their roots go and the quality of relationships we have with people? Folks, in this day and age, numbers still count, but we're worrying about numbers less and less. We're focusing more on what does it mean to plant roots somewhere, plant them deep, and to be stable in the midst of storms, and what does it mean to have depth and quality relationships? I'm all for counting numbers, but if that's all the metric we use, it's not deep enough, it's too shallow, way too shallow. And then finally, after reading and meditating whatever passage of scripture you choose, praying it and allowing it to shape and form you, how about journaling about it and using it for prayer? And then contemplating it. Release it, let it go, it's done its work. While you're walking or jogging or sitting in front of a good fire or preparing a meal for those you love, contemplate. What does it mean to forgive 70 times 7? What does it mean the Lord is my shepherd? I shall not want. What does it mean? What time I'm afraid, I will put my trust in thee. Folks, there is a whole book full of promises and possibility. My challenge to all of us, and to me as one who has the gig every week and who has to produce every week, is to let this book and its lessons shape and form us, and not be so much about analyzing it, but coming to it with an open heart and mind and letting it form us. Are you with me? May it be that Scripture becomes one of the contemporary monastic disciplines that you learn to practice more and more